I risked everything to plow my neighborhood for free during a blizzard, and the HOA tried to slap me with an $800 fine. The blizzard hit overnight. By morning, the entire neighborhood was buried under nearly 2 feet of snow. Roads vanished. Driveways disappeared. Cars looked like frozen tombstones. The HOA hadn't prepared. The snow removal company never showed up. People were stuck inside, some without heat, others unable to leave for work or emergencies. I looked out my window at the chaos, then at my old pickup truck with a mounted snow plow. I sighed and decided to help. The storm had arrived without mercy. By 3 in the morning, the wind was howling like something alive, and the snow came down so thick it erased the world 10 feet at a time. When I woke just before dawn, the street outside my bedroom window had already disappeared under a smooth white blanket that reached halfway up the mailbox. Cars were buried to their door handles. Driveways were gone. The whole neighborhood looked like it had been erased and redrawn by someone who only knew how to draw curves. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of black coffee, watching the flakes still falling in lazy, relentless spirals. The radio was on low, emergency alerts looping every few minutes. Stay indoors, roads impassable, power outages scattered across the county. I could hear the low groan of branches bending under the weight, the occasional sharp crack when one gave up entirely. Most people would have gone back to bed. I almost did. Instead, I pulled on the old insulated coveralls, the ones that still smelled faintly of diesel and pine from last winter. I laced my heaviest boots, wrapped a wool scarf twice around my neck, and tugged the hood of my parka until only my eyes showed. The garage door fought me the whole way up. Ice had sealed the tracks, but once it was open, the cold rushed in like it had been waiting for an invitation. My old Ford 8N tractor sat in the far corner under a tarp, the blade already attached from the last light snowfall 2 weeks earlier. I'd kept the battery on a trickle charger just in case, a habit from my father who used to say, "Hope for sun, prepare for hell." I uncovered the tractor, checked the fuel, primed the glow plugs, and after 3 stubborn turns the diesel finally caught with that familiar cough and rattle. By the time I backed out into the driveway, the sky was the color of wet concrete, and the temperature had dropped to -12. The snow was still coming, but lighter now, more like a taunt than an assault. I started at the end of Maple Lane, where the county plow had given up hours earlier. The blade bit into the drift and pushed a slow, heavy wave of white ahead of me. The tractor rocked and complained, but it kept moving. I worked in long, patient passes, back and forth, carving out a single clean lane down the center of the street. When I reached the first cross street, I turned and repeated the process on the perpendicular road. No one had asked me to. No one had even seen me yet. The first sign of life came around 7:30. A young mother stood in her open doorway, bathrobe pulled tight, one arm wrapped around a toddler in footed pajamas. She watched me clear the entrance to her driveway, the snow curling away in perfect arcs. When I finished, she lifted her free hand in a small, hesitant wave. I lifted mine back, just 2 fingers off the steering wheel, then shifted into reverse and moved on. Next was Mrs. Delgado's place on the corner lot. She was 83, lived alone, and still insisted on shoveling her own walk every winter until her hip gave out 2 years ago. I knew she wouldn't be out today. Through the frosted living room window, I saw the curtain twitch. Then her face appeared, small, pale, framed by white hair. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. I couldn't hear her voice, but I saw her mouth the word "thank you" 3 times, slow and deliberate. I nodded once, lowered the blade again, and cleared the entire length of her driveway plus the path right up to her front porch steps. Around 9 o'clock, the neighborhood began to wake up in fragments. A man in a red hunting jacket stepped onto his porch with a mug, stared at the suddenly open street, then looked left and right until he spotted the tractor. He raised the mug like a toast. I returned the gesture with a small salute and kept going. By 10, the wind had dropped and the sun tried to break through, thin, pale light that made the snow glitter like crushed glass. My hands were numb inside the gloves. My back ached from the constant vibration of the engine, but I didn't stop. There was something satisfying about the rhythm of it, Lower blade, push forward, lift, reverse, repeat. Each pass left behind proof that someone had cared enough to show up. I saved the worst for last. The long, steep driveway belonging to the Carter family at the top of the hill. 3 teenage boys lived there, plus their parents and a golden retriever that barked at everything. Normally, the kids would have been out with shovels, racing each other, laughing. Today, the driveway was a solid wall of snow 6 feet high at the entrance, the kind of drift that forms when wind and geography conspire against you. I spent almost 90 minutes on that one driveway alone, back and forth, inch by inch, until I finally broke through to the garage doors. When the path was wide enough for a car, I climbed down from the tractor, stiff-legged and soaked with sweat under the coveralls, and knocked on the side door. Mrs. Carter opened it before my second knock. She was still in slippers and a sweatshirt, hair in a messy bun. Behind her, the 3 boys crowded the hallway, eyes wide. "You didn't have to do that," she said, voice thick. "Didn't have to," I agreed. "Wanted to." She looked past me at the open driveway, then back at me. We were going to wait until the county came, maybe tomorrow. The boys were getting cabin fever. One of the teenagers, the middle one, Ethan, stepped forward. "That's a lot of snow you moved, man, like a mountain." I shrugged, wasn't planning on keeping it. Mrs. Carter disappeared for a moment and returned with a large travel mug. Steam curled from the lid. "It's not much, but it's hot. Black, no sugar. Figured that's how you take it." I wrapped my gloved hands around the warmth. "You figured right." I sipped once, nodded thanks, then climbed back onto the tractor. The boys waved like they were sending off a ship. I gave them a short blast on the horn, 2 quick beeps, and headed down the hill. By noon, the main loop of the neighborhood was open. Side streets still needed work, but at least people could get out if they had to. Ambulances could reach houses. Delivery trucks could try. Kids could sled without blocking emergency access. Small victories. I parked the tractor in my own driveway, killed the engine, and sat there for a long minute listening to the tick of cooling metal. My shoulders burned. My thighs trembled from clutching the controls. Snow had melted inside my boots and my socks were soaked. But the street in front of my house looked clean, almost innocent, like nothing had ever tried to bury it. I walked inside, kicked off the boots in the mudroom, hung the coveralls on the hook and went straight to the kitchen sink. Cold water on my face, then hot on my hands until the feeling came back. I made another coffee, black, and stood at the window watching the light change on the snow. That's when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it. My body was screaming for a hot shower and 8 hours horizontal, but something made me pick it up. The screen showed a group text from the neighborhood association board. People I rarely heard from unless someone's trash can was out of place. "Has anyone seen who cleared the streets this morning? Every major road and most driveways are open. Whoever it was, we owe you big time." Another message popped in immediately. It was Tom with the orange tractor. Saw him from my window, 6 hours straight, didn't ask for anything. A string of heart emojis followed, then clapping hands, then a photo someone had taken from an upstairs window. My tractor in the middle of the street, blade raised, a long clean path stretching behind it like a promise kept. More messages poured in. "Thank you, Tom. You're a legend. Seriously, name your price. Hot chocolate at my place when you're done." My mom cried when she saw her driveway. She hasn't been out in 3 days. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Part of me wanted to type something humble, deflect, change the subject. Another part, the tired, honest part, felt a quiet warmth spread through my chest. I set the phone down without replying. Outside, the snow had finally stopped. The sun was stronger now, throwing long blue shadows across the white lawns. A cardinal landed on the feeder, bright red against all that monochrome. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed, high and clear. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and headed for the shower. Tomorrow the county plows would come through and claim credit. The news would talk about infrastructure response times. Life would go back to normal. But today the neighborhood remembered that sometimes the best response doesn't come from a government office or a contract. Sometimes it comes from one person, on an old tractor in the cold, doing the right thing simply because it was right. And that was enough. 2 days later, the world had thawed just enough to pretend winter was finished with us. The temperature crept above freezing for the first time in a week, turning the pristine white drifts into gray slush that collected in every gutter and low spot. Sidewalks glistened dangerously. Kids were already out throwing half-melted snowballs that landed with wet slaps. The county plow had finally come through late the previous afternoon, scraping the main roads down to blacktop and piling the excess so high at the ends of driveways that some cars looked like they were parked inside igloos. I spent the morning in the garage, hosing salt and slush off the tractor blade, wiping down the seat, checking the hydraulic fluid. Routine maintenance, the kind of work that keeps your hands busy while your mind replays the last 48 hours. The waves, the coffee mug, the kids cheering from the porch, the sudden flood of grateful messages on the neighborhood group chat. I'd finally answered a few of them, short replies, nothing flowery. Glad it helped. No need to pay me anything. Just doing what needed doing. Each time I hit send, I felt a small, private satisfaction, the kind you don't post about. Around 11:30, I walked back to the front porch to grab the empty coffee thermos I'd left out there. That's when I saw it. A plain white envelope, legal size, tucked under the brass door knocker so it wouldn't blow away. No stamp, hand-delivered. In the top left corner, printed in tidy black ink. Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Covenant Enforcement Division. My stomach did a lazy roll. Not fear, exactly. More like the moment you realize the joke you thought was funny is actually on you. I carried the envelope inside without opening it, set it on the kitchen table next to yesterday's newspaper, and poured fresh coffee. For almost 10 minutes I just stared at it while the steam rose in slow spirals. Part of me wanted to drop it straight into the recycling bin unopened. Another part, the stubborn part, was curious in the same way you're curious about a bruise. You know pressing it will hurt, but you press anyway. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. A single sheet of paper, crisp, laser printed on the association's letterhead. The font was Arial 11-point, the same one they used for meeting minutes and pool rules. At the top, centered and bold. Official violation notice. Date January 5, 2026. Property owner Thomas R. Harlan. Address 1427 Maple Lane. Violation date S. January 3, 2026. I read the subject line 3 times before the words arranged themselves into something that made sense. Unauthorized modification of common property. Operation of unapproved mechanical equipment on association-maintained areas. Creation of potential liability exposure to the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. The body of the letter was colder than the wind had been 2 mornings earlier. On or about January 3, 2026, between the hours of approximately 5:45 a.m. and 12:15 p.m., the above-named property owner operated a tractor-mounted snow plow on multiple streets and driveways within the Maple Grove subdivision, including portions classified as common areas and rights-of-way under the recorded covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS of the association. Such activity constitutes an unauthorized alteration of common property, as no prior written approval was obtained from the Architectural Review Committee or the Board of Directors, per Article V, Section 3.2 of the CC and RS. Furthermore, the use of non-association-maintained equipment introduces an unmitigated liability risk to the association in the event of property damage, personal injury, or other claims arising from said activity. The board has determined this to be a Class B violation. Fine assessed, $800. Payment due, January 19, 2026. Failure to remit payment by the due date will result in additional late fees of $50 per month and possible placement of a lien on the subject property. A correction plan is required within 10 calendar days of receipt of this notice. Owner must submit written acknowledgement of the violation and a signed statement affirming that no further unapproved equipment operations will occur on common areas without express prior approval. The association reserves all rights and remedies available under the CC and RS, state law, and any applicable statutes. Sincerely, Margaret L. Voss, Covenant Enforcement Officer, Maple Grove Homeowners Association. There was a footer with phone numbers, email, website, and the inevitable disclaimer about how this notice did not constitute a waiver of any other violations that might later come to light. I laid the page flat on the table and laughed once, short, sharp, more exhale than mirth. Then I read it again. Then a third time, slower, letting each phrase settle like wet snow on bare skin. $800. For plowing snow. For free. During a state-declared blizzard emergency, when the county hadn't shown up for 36 hours. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street I had opened. A FedEx truck was making its way down Maple Lane now, tires crunching through the remaining slush. A teenage girl on a bicycle wobbled past, backpack bouncing. Normal Tuesday life. None of it looked unauthorized. I returned to the table, picked up my phone, and scrolled to the neighborhood group chat. 57 unread messages since yesterday afternoon. I opened the thread. Someone had posted a photo of the violation notice, same wording, different address. Then another. Then screenshots of emails. A dozen or so homeowners had received identical letters, all dated the same day, all citing the same tractor incident. The comments were a mix of disbelief, anger, dark humor, and one or two people actually defending the board. Are they serious? This has to be a joke, right? I got one too. $800 for helping my 84-year-old neighbor get to dialysis. Classic HOA. Can't fix the potholes, but they'll fine you for clearing snow. Technically, they're right about common areas. The streets are association maintained. Technically, we were in a state of emergency. People couldn't get out. Still laughing at unapproved mechanical equipment, like it's a riding mower on the lawn. Anyone know if we can fight this? Fight it, and they'll just raise dues next year to cover legal fees. I closed the app. Outside, the sun had broken through fully now, turning the slush into thousands of tiny mirrors. I could hear water dripping from the gutters, steady as a metronome. Somewhere a dog barked once, then stopped. I folded the letter carefully, returned it to the envelope, and placed it on the mantel next to the small wooden carving of a tractor my father had made when I was 12. It felt like the right place for it, next to something real. Then I went back to the garage, started the tractor again, and drove it around to the backyard where it couldn't be seen from the street. Not because I was afraid, but because I suddenly didn't want to give them any more photographs to circle in red ink. I spent the rest of the afternoon splitting firewood. Each swing of the maul was deliberate, satisfying. The crack of splitting oak echoed off the neighbor's fence. By dusk my shoulders were loose again, my hands smelled of pine resin, and the pile under the linta was taller than it had been in years. When the sky turned the bruised purple of early winter evening, I carried an armload of splits inside, built a small fire in the living room hearth, and sat on the rug with a beer I didn't really want. The letter sat on the mantel, watching me. I stared back. They could have the $800 if they wanted it that badly. Or they could try to collect it and discover exactly how many neighbors were willing to stand in a courtroom and testify that the man with the orange tractor had kept their elderly parents from starving, their kids from missing insulin shots, their own sanity from cracking under cabin fever. But I already knew I wasn't going to write the check. Not yet. Not without asking a few questions first. I opened my laptop, pulled up the association bylaws, and started reading. Somewhere in those pages, buried under legalese and semicolons, was the answer to one simple question. When did helping your neighbor become a violation of the rules? And when did following those rules start mattering more than the people they were supposed to protect? The fire popped, a log settled, outside the temperature was falling again. I kept reading. The emergency meeting was announced via email at 6:47 p.m. on January 5, less than 48 hours after the violation notices landed on doorsteps. Subject line: Urgent Special Session Covenant Enforcement Matter. No agenda attached. Just a Zoom link, a physical location, the community center multi-purpose room, and the instruction to RSVP if attending in person due to limited seating. I did RSVP, I just showed up. The community center smelled of old coffee and industrial floor wax. Folding tables had been pushed against the walls. Rows of gray plastic chairs faced a long table at the front where the board usually sat. Tonight only 3 seats were occupied. Margaret Voss, Covenant Enforcement Officer, Paul Whitaker, Treasurer, and Elaine Whitaker, Paul's wife and current HOA President. Elaine Whitaker, 58 years old, former elementary school principal, always wore blazers the color of putty or oatmeal, hair the exact shade of expensive walnut stain, voice that could cut glass when she wanted it to. She had lived on Maple Lane longer than almost anyone. Rumor said she'd written half the current CC and RS herself back in 2004 when the subdivision was still half dirt and promise. I took a seat in the 3rd row, not too close, not too far. About 20 other residents had come, some I recognized from the snow-clearing waves, some I'd never seen outside their garage doors. The room buzzed with low, angry murmurs. Phones were out, recording discreetly under tables. At 7:03, Elaine tapped her pen against the clipboard. Once, twice, 3 times, and the room quieted like a classroom before roll call. "Thank you for coming on short notice," she began. No smile yet. "This special session has been called to address a serious breach of our governing documents that occurred during the recent weather event. The board has received multiple violation notices and corresponding complaints regarding unauthorized equipment use on common areas. We are here to clarify the rules, answer questions, and move forward in a manner consistent with our community standards." She still hadn't looked up from the clipboard. Paul Whitaker cleared his throat. "For the record, we're not here to debate the weather or personal acts of kindness. We're here to discuss adherence to recorded covenants that protect property values and limit liability for every homeowner." A woman in the front row, Mrs. Delgado's daughter, Carla, raised her hand. Elaine nodded without making eye contact. "So you're saying my mother's driveway being cleared so she could get to her cardiologist appointment was a threat to property values?" Elaine's pen paused. "We're saying the method used was not approved. There are proper channels. The association has a snow removal contract. When that contractor was delayed due to the storm's severity, the board was actively working with emergency services to prioritize critical access routes." Carla laughed once, sharp and short. "You mean the same contractor who didn't show up until yesterday afternoon?" "That is not the point," Elaine said. Her voice stayed level, professional. "The point is process." I had been quiet until then. I raised my hand, not high, just enough. Elaine's eyes finally lifted. They settled on me the way a hawk settles on a field mouse. She knew exactly who I was. "Mr. Harlan," she said. The name came out like she was reading it off a subpoena. "You have the floor." I stood, not for drama, just so my voice would carry without shouting. "I have a question," I said. "Not about process, about outcome. If I had stayed inside with a hot coffee and waited for the approved contractor, how many people in this room would have been unable to leave their homes for another day? How many medications would have been missed? How many jobs would have been lost because someone couldn't get their car out? How many elderly residents would have spent another 24 hours afraid to walk to their own mailbox? The room was dead silent now. Elaine tilted her head slightly. That is a hypothetical, Mr. Harlan. We deal in facts and rules, not hypotheticals. So next time, I said slowly, I should let people stay trapped. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the clipboard down with deliberate care, folded her hands on the table and looked straight at me. Then she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even polite. It was thin, controlled, the kind of smile a teacher gives a student who has finally asked the question she most wanted to answer, because it lets her deliver the lesson she's been rehearsing. That's not your decision, she said. The words landed like snow on hot asphalt, soft at first, then gone, but leaving a hiss behind them. I felt the shift in the room. Chairs creaked. Someone exhaled hard through their nose. A phone camera clicked. I stayed standing. So the decision belongs to who? The board, the contractor who couldn't get here, the insurance company that might have to pay if someone slips on untreated ice. The decision, Elaine said, smile still in place, belongs to the governance structure every homeowner agreed to when they purchased property in Maple Grove. That structure exists so that no single individual can expose the entire community to risk. You may have acted with good intentions. That does not exempt you from the consequences of bypassing the system. Paul Whitaker leaned in. We've already consulted legal counsel. The fines stand. The violation notices are valid. If you pay by the 19th, this can be resolved quietly. If not, the association is prepared to pursue all available remedies, including lien placement and, if necessary, foreclosure proceedings. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Carla stood up. You're threatening to foreclose on someone for clearing snow. We're reminding everyone, Elaine said smoothly, that covenants are contracts. Contracts have enforcement mechanisms. I looked at her, really looked. The smile was still there, smaller now, almost satisfied. It told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about snow. It wasn't about liability or property values or even the contractor's feelings. It was about control. About who got to decide what help looked like. About who got to be the hero and who got to write the permission slip for heroism. About reminding every resident, quietly but unmistakably, that good intentions were fine, provided they came with prior approval in triplicate and didn't inconvenience the hierarchy. I sat back down. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. More questions, more deflections. A few residents tried to propose an emergency amendment to allow resident snow removal during declared emergencies. Elaine tabled it for the next regular meeting. Someone asked if the $800 fines would be reduced if paid early. Elaine said the board would consider mitigating circumstances on a case-by-case basis. No one laughed, but several people wrote the phrase down. When the meeting adjourned at 8:12, people didn't rush for the door. They lingered in small clusters, talking in low voices. I stayed in my chair until most of the room had emptied. Elaine remained at the front table, gathering papers, speaking quietly to Paul and Margaret. As I passed, she looked up again. Mr. Harlan, she said, still polite, still calm, I hope you'll reconsider your position. Paying the fine promptly would be the simplest path for everyone. I stopped, looked at her. I hope you'll reconsider yours, I said, because the next time it snows this hard, people are going to remember who told them to stay trapped. Her smile flickered just for a second, then returned, steady as ever. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, she said. I walked out into the January night. The air was sharp again, the temperature dropping fast. Stars were out, hard and bright. My truck sat under a streetlight, engine ticking as it cooled. I didn't start it right away. Instead, I stood there, hands in pockets, watching my breath turn white. Across the parking lot, Carla Delgado was helping her mother into the passenger seat of a minivan. Mrs. Delgado turned, saw me, and lifted her hand the same way she had through the frosted window 2 mornings earlier. Slow, certain, thank you. I lifted mine back. Then I got in the truck, started the engine, and drove home. The fine notice was still on the mantel next to the carved tractor. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But I knew one thing clearly now. That smile wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the opening move. I didn't go straight to bed after the meeting. The house was quiet except for the low crackle of the dying fire and the occasional drip from an icicle that had formed on the gutter outside the kitchen window. My coat stayed on the hook by the door. Boots stayed in the mudroom. I walked straight to the small office I'd carved out of the old sunroom years ago. Bookshelves crammed with repair manuals, fishing guides, and one shelf dedicated to the stack of paperwork every homeowner accumulates whether they want to or not. The Maple Grove Homeowners Association Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions lived in a navy blue 3-ring binder labeled simply HOA. The spine was cracked from years of reluctant consultation. I pulled it down, set it on the desk under the gooseneck lamp, and opened to the table of contents. Page 47 came up fast. I'd marked it once before, back in 2018 when they tried to force everyone to repaint garage doors the same shade of driftwood gray. I hadn't fought that one. This time felt different. Article IX, Maintenance of Common Areas and Limited Common Elements. Section 9, Emergency Provisions. Subsection C, Resident Self-Help in Emergencies. The language was dry, almost buried in legalese, the way lawyers hide lifeboats in the fine print. In the event of a declared local, state, or national emergency, or when association-provided services, including but not limited to snow removal, road maintenance, or access restoration, fail to prevent imminent harm to persons or property within the community, any resident may undertake reasonable and necessary actions to prevent such harm, provided that such actions are limited in scope, duration, and method to the minimum necessary to alleviate the immediate risk. Any such actions shall not be deemed a violation of these covenants, and the association shall not impose fines, liens, or other penalties related thereto, absent clear evidence of gross negligence or willful misconduct. I read it twice, then aloud slowly, letting each clause settle. In the event of a declared local, state, or national emergency. The governor had declared a state of emergency at 8:14 p.m. on January 2. The snow started at midnight. Official declaration was in every news alert, every radio loop. Or when association-provided services failed to prevent imminent harm. The association's snow removal contractor, Snowtech Services LLC, was supposed to have plows on the ground by 4 a.m. on the 3rd. They didn't arrive until 4:17 p.m. on the 4th. I knew because I'd checked the county dispatch logs later that night. Public record, easy to pull. 13 hours late, people trapped, ambulances rerouted. One resident, a diabetic on the far cul-de-sac, had to have his wife walk 3/4 of a mile through drifts to meet the paramedics at the subdivision entrance. Any resident may undertake reasonable and necessary actions. I had photos on my phone, time-stamped images of the buried streets at 6:12 a.m., my blade cutting the first path down Maple Lane at 6:47, Mrs. Delgado's front door still blocked at 7:03, then open at 7:41. Dashcam footage from the tractor, grainy but clear, showing me pushing snow, pausing when a kid ran out to wave, then continuing. Text messages saved in a folder labeled thank yous. Carla Delgado at 8:19 a.m. Mom made it to her appointment. You're a lifesaver. Ethan Carter at 10:42. Dude, we got out for groceries. Thanks for real. Mrs. Patel at 11:58. My husband's oxygen delivery truck made it through. God bless you. Even one from a stranger whose name I didn't recognize. Saw what you did from my Ring camera. Never met you, but thank you. I printed the bylaw page, highlighted subsection C in yellow, then printed the governor's emergency declaration from the state website, PDF still saved in downloads. The Snowtech contract delay emails forwarded from the HOA secretary, someone had leaked them to the group chat, and a screenshot of the association's own website showing the current vendors list. Snowtech Services LLC, contract renewed December 15, 2025, full winter coverage guaranteed. Then I noticed something else. Buried in Article V, Architectural Controls and Use Restrictions, Section 4, Maintenance Standards, was a different clause. All services provided by or on behalf of the Association for Common Area Maintenance, including snow removal, shall be performed by contractors holding current, valid commercial licenses and insurance certificates as required by state law and county ordinance. Proof of such licensing and insurance shall be maintained on file with the association secretary and made available to any member upon request. I flipped back to the vendor list on the HOA website. Snowtech Services LLC was listed, yes, but I'd seen their truck when they finally showed up, white Ford F-550 with a beat-up wing plow. No visible license plate on the plow itself. No county commercial vehicle sticker. I opened my laptop, pulled up the state contractor licensing database, and typed Snowtech Services LLC. No record. Not for commercial snow removal. Not for heavy equipment operation on public or private rights-of-way. Not even a basic business license under that exact name in the last 3 years. I searched variations. Snowtech, Snowtech Inc., Snowtech Services. Nothing matched the LLC designation or the address listed on the HOA site. The association had been paying a company that, on paper, didn't exist as a licensed snow removal contractor. I leaned back in the chair. The lamp cast a hard circle of light on the desk. Everything else in the room went soft and dark. My pulse wasn't racing. It was steady, deliberate, the way it gets when you realize the other side has overplayed their hand. They could fine me for unauthorized equipment. They could threaten liens. They could lecture me about process and liability. But they had hired an unlicensed contractor to handle the very service they were now punishing residents for providing in that contractor's absence. And they had forgotten, or deliberately ignored, the emergency self-help clause they themselves had written into the bylaws 20 years earlier. I closed the binder, stacked the printouts, saved the digital files to a new folder labeled HOA Jan 2026. Then I opened a blank document and started typing. Not a letter yet. Just notes. Exact text of subsection C, page 47. Governor's Declaration timestamp. Snowtech delay timeline, county dispatch plus HOA vendor emails. Resident thank you messages, anonymized if needed. Proof of Snowtech non-licensure, state database screenshot. HOA vendor page archive, Wayback Machine capture, just in case they changed it. I saved the document as Response Draft V1 DocX. Outside, the temperature had dropped below zero again. The windows rattled faintly when a gust hit the house. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then went quiet. I turned off the lamp. The fire in the living room had burned down to embers. I added 2 splits, watched them catch, then sat on the rug with my back against the couch. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. I was calm in the way you get when you found the loose thread in someone else's sweater. One pull, and the whole thing starts to unravel. They had the smile. They had the clipboard. They had the fines and the threats. But I had something better. I had the rules. Their rules. And tomorrow I was going to remind them, politely, in writing, with attachments, Exactly what those rules said when the snow fell hard and the contractor didn't show up. I closed my eyes. The embers popped softly. For the first time in 3 days, I slept without dreaming about plows. The next regular board meeting was scheduled for January 15, 2026, 12 days after the emergency session, 10 days before the first fines were due. The agenda, posted on the community bulletin board and emailed to every household, listed only routine items: approval of December landscaping invoices, discussion of spring mulch bids, review of pool pump replacement quotes. No mention of the snow removal controversy. No agenda item titled Covenant Enforcement Update or Resident Self-Help Clarification. They were hoping it would blow over. They were wrong. I arrived at 6:45 p.m., 5 minutes early. The multi-purpose room looked the same: gray chairs, long front table, flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. Tonight the crowd was larger, closer to 40 residents. Some stood along the back wall. A few had brought folding chairs from home. Phones were already recording before Elaine Whittaker even entered. She arrived at 7:01, Paul at her side, Margaret Voss trailing with her ever-present clipboard. Elaine wore the oatmeal blazer again, hair pinned precisely. She gave the room a quick scan, professional, detached, then sat at the center of the table and opened her binder without preamble. "Good evening," she said. "We have a full agenda, so let's begin promptly. First item, approval of the December 2025 financials." A hand went up immediately. Carla Delgado, front row, center. "Point of order," Carla said. "Before we move to financials, I move that we add an emergency agenda item: review and rescission of all Class B violation notices issued January 5, 2026, related to snow removal during the January 3 blizzard." Murmurs rippled through the room. Elaine's pen paused mid-signature on the financial report. "That motion is not in order. New business must be submitted in writing 7 days in advance." Another hand, Mr. Patel from the cul-de-sac. "Then I submit it now in writing." He held up a single sheet of paper, dated today, signed by 17 residents. Elaine glanced at the sheet without taking it. "The board will consider whether to accept the motion at the appropriate time. For now, we proceed with the published agenda." Paul leaned over and whispered something. Elaine nodded once. "Motion to table discussion of any January snow removal matters until the February regular meeting," Paul said. "All in favor?" 3 hands went up: Elaine, Paul, Margaret. "Motion carries," Elaine said. "Next item." That was when I stood. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't ask for recognition. I simply walked to the front of the room, slow, deliberate, carrying a slim manila folder. I stopped at the edge of the board table, close enough that they had to look up at me. "Mr. Harlan," Elaine began, voice tight, "public comment is limited to 3 minutes during the open forum section, which comes after." "I'm not here for public comment," I said quietly. "I'm here to present evidence in response to the violation notice issued against me, and against at least 11 other residents whose fines remain outstanding." I opened the folder and placed the first item on the table in front of Elaine: an 8x11 color print of the governor's emergency declaration, timestamped January 2, 8:14 p.m. "Declared state of emergency," I said, "which triggers Article IX, Section 9, Subsection C." Next page. The highlighted bylaw excerpt itself, page 47, yellow marker bright under the fluorescence. "In the event of a declared emergency, or when association-provided services fail to prevent imminent harm, any resident may undertake reasonable and necessary actions. No prior approval required. No fine permitted absent gross negligence." I laid down the next sheet, a timeline printed in 2 columns. Left column: Association Contractor Snowtech Services LLC scheduled arrival 4:00 a.m. January 3. Right column. Actual arrival 4:17 p.m. January 4. Delay 36 hours 17 minutes. Below that, screenshots of county dispatch logs and the HOA's own vendor email chain admitting the contractor experienced mechanical difficulties and staffing shortages due to storm intensity. Then the photos, my photos, timestamped. 6:12 a.m. January 3. Maple Lane completely buried, no tire tracks. 6:47 a.m. First pass with the blade, path opening. 7:41 a.m. Mrs. Delgado's driveway cleared to the porch. 9:22 a.m. Carter family driveway broken through. 11:15 a.m. Main loop passable for emergency vehicles. I added printed text messages, names redacted where requested, each thanking me for enabling access to medication, work, groceries, oxygen deliveries. The room had gone still, no whispers, no chair creaks. I reached into the folder one last time and slid a single sheet across the table until it rested directly under Elaine's folded hands. The state contractor licensing database search result. Snowtech Services LLC. Status: no active commercial snow removal license. No heavy equipment operator certifications on file. No liability insurance certificate matching the policy number listed in the HOA vendor agreement. I looked straight at Elaine. Article V, Section 4, I said. All services provided by or on behalf of the association shall be performed by contractors holding current, valid commercial licenses. Proof of such licensing shall be maintained on file. I let the sentence hang. Your contracted snow removal provider was not licensed for at least the last 3 winters. That means the association itself has been in ongoing violation of its own covenants. Every year you collected dues to pay an unlicensed contractor, you exposed the entire community to the very liability you accused residents of creating. I stepped back one pace. Not only is the $800 fine invalid under the emergency self-help clause you yourselves wrote, but your failure to provide the contracted service and your failure to verify the contractor's credentials puts the HOA in material breach of its own governing documents. I closed the folder with a soft snap. The silence lasted perhaps 8 seconds. Then someone in the back started slow clapping. 3 claps, 4, others joined, not thunderous, measured, inevitable. Elaine's smile was gone. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. Her hands stayed folded on the table, but the knuckles had turned white. Paul stared at the licensing printout like it might bite him. Margaret Voss was flipping frantically through her clipboard, as if she might find a rebuttal stapled between the pool rules and the mulch bids. I spoke one last time, voice calm, volume just loud enough to carry. I'm not asking you to drop the fines tonight. I'm telling you what the rules say. And because the rules say it, I'm filing a formal complaint with the board tonight demanding 1. Immediate rescission of all January 3 violation notices. 2. A full audit of the snow removal contract for the past 5 years. 3. Reimbursement of any resident who paid the fine under duress. 4. Written clarification. To be mailed to every household that emergency self-help under subsection C is permitted and protected. If the board chooses not to act, I will escalate the matter to the county attorney's office for review under state condominium and homeowners association statutes, and I will make sure every resident receives a copy of this evidence packet. I looked around the room, really looked, faces I had waved to from the tractor, faces that had thanked me through windows, faces now watching the board with something new in their eyes. Then I turned back to Elaine. You said it wasn't my decision, I reminded her quietly. You were right. It's the rules' decision, and the rules are very clear. I walked back to my seat. No one spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Elaine cleared her throat. Her voice was thinner than usual. "We will take this under advisement. The board will adjourn to executive session to discuss legal matters. Meeting recessed." She stood, Paul and Margaret followed. They disappeared through the side door without another word. The room didn't empty quickly. People stayed, talking in low voices, showing each other their phones where they'd recorded the presentation. Several came up to me, quiet handshakes, quick thanks, one older man who simply said, "About damn time." Carla Delgado caught me at the door. "You think they'll actually do it?" she asked. "They don't have much choice," I said. "Not unless they want to explain to a judge why they ignored their own bylaws while residents were stranded." She nodded slowly. "Next time it snows." "Next time it snows," I said, "I'll still plow, and I'll still keep the receipts." I stepped outside. The January night was cold and clear, stars sharp overhead. My truck waited under the same streetlight as before. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt even. The board could still fight. They could lawyer up. They could try to rewrite the narrative. But the paper was on the table now. And once the truth is on the table, smiles don't put it back in the folder. 3 days later, January 18, 2026, a Saturday morning cold enough to crack lips, I found the second envelope in my mailbox. No dramatic placement under the knocker this time, just tucked between a grocery store flyer and the electric bill. Same white legal-size envelope. Same HOA return address in the corner. My name typed in the same Arial font. I carried it inside without opening it, set it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, and poured a mug, black, hot. I stood there staring at the envelope the way you stare at a rattlesnake that might already be dead. Then I tore it open. One sheet, no letterhead flourish, no signature line at the bottom, just centered text brief as a telegram. Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Notice of violation disposition. Property owner, Thomas R. Harlan. Address, 1427 Maple Lane. Violation reference, CE 2026001, dated January 5, 2026. Status update. After review of governing documents, applicable emergency declarations, and submitted resident documentation, the Board of Directors has determined that the cited activity falls within the protections of Article IX, Section 9, Subsection C, Emergency Self-Help Provision. Fine assessed, $800. Status, voided effective immediately. No further action required at this time. All related violation notices issued on or about January 5, 2026, concerning snow removal activities during the January 3, 2026, weather event have likewise been rescinded. The association appreciates resident cooperation in maintaining community standards. That was it. No apology. No, we were wrong. No acknowledgement that the fines had ever been issued in bad faith. Just voided, in capital letters that felt more like surrender than grace. I read it twice, then folded the page and set it beside the first violation notice on the mantel. They looked almost comical side by side, one threatening liens and foreclosure, the other pretending none of it had happened. But that wasn't the end. By Monday, the group chat was alive again. Not with outrage this time, but with screenshots and quiet triumph. Carla Delgado posted first, a photo of her own voided notice, timestamped the same day as mine. They backed down, all fines gone. Then Mr. Patel, just got my refund check in the mail. $800 plus $50 late fee reversal they never should have charged. One by one, the messages rolled in. 12 residents confirmed refunds, direct deposits for some, checks for others. Amounts varied slightly. Some had paid under pressure before the meeting, others hadn't, but every dollar was coming back. Then the bigger news landed Wednesday afternoon. An emergency email blast from the HOA secretary, not Elaine, tellingly. Subject: Important update. Snow removal services and governing document amendment. The board has terminated the snow removal contract with Snowtech Services, LLC, effective immediately due to noncompliance with licensing and insurance requirements. A new vendor, County Line Winter Services, fully licensed, bonded, and insured, references available upon request, has been engaged starting with the next precipitation event. Contract includes guaranteed 6-hour response time during declared emergencies or severe weather warnings. Additionally, following legal review and resident feedback, the board has proposed the following amendment to the CC and RS. Proposed addition to Article IX, Section 9. Subsection D, Emergency Snow Removal Protocol. In the event association contracted snow removal is delayed beyond 4 hours from the onset of a declared winter weather emergency, residents are expressly authorized to perform limited, reasonable snow clearing on private driveways and immediately adjacent common area access points without prior approval, provided such actions do not create new hazards or obstruct emergency vehicle access. Documentation, photos, timestamps, is recommended for record keeping. The proposed amendment will be voted on at the February 20 special meeting. A draft of the full text, including the new emergency response clause, is attached. All members in good standing are encouraged to review and attend. Questions may be directed to the board via the community portal. No signature from Elaine. Just the secretary's name and title. I opened the attachment, 23 pages of proposed language, but the new subsection D was highlighted in blue. Clean, clear, almost exactly what several residents had asked for in the chaotic aftermath of the January 15 meeting. Someone, probably the association's attorney, had taken the self-help clause we'd waved in their faces and turned it into formal policy. The next morning my phone rang, unknown number, local area code. I answered. Mr. Harlan, this is Margaret Voss, Covenant Enforcement Officer. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Margaret. A pause. The board asked me to reach out. They would like to invite you to participate in the vendor selection subcommittee for the new snow removal contract. And they've also asked if you would be willing to consult on final language for the proposed subsection D amendment. Your perspective on practical emergency response was noted. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Consult, I repeated. Yes, as a resident subject matter expert, so to speak. No compensation, of course, it's volunteer, but your input would carry weight. I looked out the window. The street was clear, blacktop showing through thin patches of remaining snow. A school bus rumbled past. Normal January Thursday. I thought about the tractor still parked in the backyard, blade cleaned and ready. About Mrs. Delgado's hand pressed to the window. About the kids who got to sled instead of being stuck indoors. About the $800 that had never been about money. Tell the board I'll consider it, I said, but only on 2 conditions. A small intake of breath on her end, which are: first, the amendment passes exactly as written, no watering down the 4-hour trigger or adding new restrictions. Second, at the February meeting, the board president reads a brief statement into the minutes acknowledging that the original fines were issued in error and that the emergency self-help provision has always been part of our governing documents. Another pause, longer this time. I'll convey that, Margaret said. Good. I ended the call. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the garage, started the tractor, and let it idle for a few minutes just to keep the battery happy. The diesel rattle echoed off the walls like an old friend saying hello. When I shut it down, the quiet felt different, less like a standoff, more like a truce. The fines were gone. The refunds were coming. A better system was being written into the rules. And they had asked me, the guy with the unauthorized orange tractor, to help make sure it stayed that way. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But I did feel the corner of my mouth lift, just a little. Sometimes the right thing doesn't just get done. Sometimes it gets remembered. And sometimes, if you keep showing up with evidence and a level voice, the people who write the rules have to rewrite them around you. I closed the garage door. Outside, the sun was low and pale, throwing long shadows across clean pavement. Next storm, I'd still plow. But now I'd do it knowing the rulebook finally agreed with me. Now every winter I still plow snow. But this time, with written HOA authorization, with neighborhood backing, and with zero fines. The HOA president avoids eye contact. And every time it snows, I smile. Because they tried to punish kindness and ended up exposed by their own rules.